My name is Adam Dowell. I'm a data analyst and a developer at DC Public Schools. I've worked there for about 5 years now at a lot of roles with different sorts of data, academic data, operational data. I currently work with our athletics team where I'm building out a QuickBase application and some web tools to help manage all of the logistical data that goes along with hosting a sports program for about 8,000 students that compete every year. So today's session is going to be about tidy data, how to structure your data for analysis and schema building. To go off and start, I'm just going to talk about a few of the influencers I have that influenced both my development as a data analyst and also some of the concepts we'll be covering in this discussion today. So first up is Hadley Wickham. Hadley is best known as the foremost developer of packages for R. He also has a really useful article on the subject of tidy data that I'm plagiarizing from a lot in this. So if this talk looks kind of useful to you or sparks some interest, I would definitely encourage you to go read that paper that he wrote about tidy data. Next is Jenny Bryan. Jenny Bryan's an engineer at RStudio and a professor at University of British Columbia. She has a really great course on how to use Git for data science projects, how to set that up, like a tutorial. If you're kind of wanting to get into that direction, it's a really fantastic course that I'd recommend you check out. JD Long and Jake Vanderplas are the next up. They've both written probably the best books on how to use either R or Python as data science, if that's something you want to get into. And then finally, Ben Morris is a data visualization expert at 538. He always has really innovative graphs. He's a good source of new ideas for me about how do I present data. So if you're kind of, I would definitely encourage you to check these folks out. They have active Twitter accounts and they're always sharing good, useful ideas and suggestions. If what we discussed today sparks interest. So our goals today are going to be to learn a framework for structuring data, and then be able to identify and avoid some of the most common mistakes that kind of new data analysts in the education space tend to make when they're getting into using spreadsheets and things like that. Also just want to mention, with this being kind of an hour-long session and a skill building session, most especially, everyone is a different place in their learning curve in terms of how advanced they are as a data practitioner at their school. So some of the stuff at the beginning is going to be fairly basic. Some of the stuff at the end will be very complex. You might be bored at the beginning or confused at the end, but hopefully there's at least like 20 minutes in the middle where you're finding some useful stuff. I know that people can kind of jump in and jump out because we're online. So just keep that in mind. If it looks like it's a little too slow or too fast for you, it will change as we go along throughout the hour. Some of the things that we're not going to cover today, I'm not going to cover how to actually transform the data in any way. Also not going to cover any of the nuances of your favorite program. So I personally do a lot of my coding in R. I've done some stuff in Python before. I know we have Excel users and SQL users and other users out there. I'm not focused on the how of how you change your data. What we're going to focus on is the what your data should look like. And once you know what it should look like, then you can figure out how to actually implement that within whatever program it is that you use. So Google is really amazing if you use the right vocabulary. So part of what I'm going to show you today is kind of use the right terminology, whether we're talking about like fields or records or wide data or different transformations, that you can then Google, how do I do this thing that we discussed in my particular program? Okay, so let's go ahead and start then. Just something about me is I really love to cook. I really enjoy cooking, especially like Thai food or something like that. And I watch a lot of cooking shows, look at cooking advertisements, and whenever I see someone out here cooking, the show always begins like this. All of the vegetables are kind of already chopped up and they're placed in the little bowls and the spices are laid out and everything's neat and organized on the table. And so this looks great. This looks really fun. This looks easy. This makes me want to cook. Unfortunately, whenever I go to cook, my kitchen usually starts off looking more like this. This does not look fun. This does not look easy. This looks like a big mess and it makes me want to run away. And this is a good analogy often for our data. Oftentimes our data...
Adam, I don't think you're sharing your screen.
I'm not? Oh,
I
okay.
can't see it.
Let me...
There we go.
Is it up now? Okay. Technology, all right. And here we are?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so anyway, what I was saying is that this is called mise en place. It means everything in its place. And this is nice and organized. Unfortunately, our data is usually kind of a mess when we get it. And we have a big temptation to kind of just jump into it, and we just need to start cooking because I got to get this turned around by tomorrow. And let me just kind of go ahead and make the project, and I'll deal with the mess as I go along. And oftentimes it's a better strategy to just take the investment to go ahead and organize everything to begin with, get the kitchen in order, get our ingredients in order, do that mise en place, and then our cooking will go a lot faster. Anyone who's had enough experience working with data will tell you that 70–80% of the job is just cleaning up your data sources and getting everything in a nice organized fashion. And then the data analysis, the really fun part, is usually like the last 20% of the piece. So we're going to talk about how do we kind of clean up our data and organize it well so we can do the fancier stuff. So the principles of how we organize our data. Each observation forms a row, also called a record in more technical language. Every variable will be a column or a field. An observational unit is a table. Tables will connect through unique keys, and then we only ever want to record our data once. Okay, so these are like the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. They're very succinct, but also very deep, and it can take you a little while to kind of internalize what that means and how you practice that with your data. I'm not going to really look at them in the abstract. What we're going to do instead is look at 4 different examples of how this can go awry. And then by looking at those examples, we'll start to see these different principles implemented in practice as we solve those mistakes. So why this is useful is because it's very highly adaptable. If you thoughtfully organize your data, you can perform your analysis and answer questions you didn't originally anticipate. And so, for example, right now, it might not matter if we separate first and last name in our data set, but it could in the future. And so that's why we want to organize it right in the correct fashion. It also allows for easy conversion between software platforms. So, usually that basically means taking the form of a CSV. Anytime you have a CSV, you can, import that into something like QuickBase or Aspen or whatever system it is you're using. You can share it with colleagues very easily with very minimal data corruption. And these are kind of the raw ingredients of an analysis. So, if you've ever been to like a Thai restaurant or Vietnamese restaurant, they have 200 things on the menu, but there's only 30 ingredients back in the kitchen. And by thoughtfully organizing those 30 ingredients and then kind of recombining them in different ways, they can make 200 different menu items. And that's what we're going to do today, is try to get ourselves down to the raw ingredients. So we're not doing one-way analysis, we're setting ourselves up to do kind of any-way analysis. I put the session materials in the chat. This is also a direct link right here. If that didn't work, 2 things I want to note is there's actually 2 folders I shared. So one folder came from Preeti in the event organizers. That folder has all the documents in it. The second folder I shared is a link to my personal Google Drive folder. It has the exact same documents in it, but my personal Google Drive folder also has a way for you to upload some examples. So normally when we do this live, I try to make it a little bit more interactive. And we're going to go through some points, and you're going to have a chance to try to practice some things on your own. And if you want to share your solution out for me to show to the rest of the class, you'll need to go to my personal Google Drive folder so you can submit your solution. And my personal Google Drive folder link is also the one that was shared in the chat. So either one will give you the materials, but only the one that I shared in the chat will allow you to submit things for us to look at together as we go through the session. Also, just some quick notes on participation. I have this set up right now as a webinar, which is a little bit more restrictive for y'all than a meeting. So please use the chat and the Q&A function in Huba. And then also, as I mentioned, we're going to share files at some point down the line as you complete things, so we can kind of take a look at the work that y'all are completing alongside the session. Okay, let me stop sharing this now and pause to go look at the chat and question, make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, it looks like we're still good. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the first example then. Let me pull that up and I'll share my screen with y'all. Okay, so the first mistake I want to go over is when people record data as columns or as fields. So this is a very common mistake I see a lot of times when people are kind of making new data. And so this right here, what we're looking at is an example. This is a spreadsheet that details the staff appointments to have their computer checked out. So as you can see, my columns here, I have a staff ID number. I have a laptop type where it's a Lenovo or a Dell or an Apple. And then here across the top, we have a number of sessions. So Monday at 1 p.m. and Monday at different other times. And then through here, I can see, okay, this means that this staff member with her Lenovo computer signed up for the Monday at 1 p.m. session. So the challenge with this is that having the column headers right here are actually data points, and we want to show them as data points instead of as columns. So the way I would reorganize this data is to kind of convert that appointment time, Monday, July 5th at 1 p.m. to a data point in a column. So now I have an appointment called appointment and then one called reservation. And if we scroll down, we can see here's one that says okay, and there's an appointment right here. That first appointment we looked at in their reservation. So the difference is that each of those individual values are now really a part of a bigger category called the appointment date and time. And so I have that shown right here. Okay. And to kind of preview what we'll do next, I could even get a little more specific and expand this out. And now I don't just have this appointment as a big chunk of information. I kind of separate out into its constituent elements. So there's a day of the week, there's a date, and there's a time, and there's a reservation. And the reason we're doing this is because now I can come through and put a pivot table in it. I can sort and filter. I can use other tools of Excel or your favorite programming tool to kind of manipulate this data and drive more answers to anything I want to ask of it. All right. So that's kind of the first thing I want us to avoid is recording data points as column headers. So in the folder of my session materials, there is a practice question, and I'll share it right here. So this is a practice data sheet that I'm going to have you all think about and work through on your own for a few minutes. So right here, what I'm showing is a list of high schools at DCPS, the school name, the principal, the award, and the number of students they have in different grades at their campuses. So take about 2 minutes yourself to think about how you would reorganize this data to avoid that mistake of including data points as column headers. And if you think you have an answer, post it in the chat on our Whova app, or go ahead and submit that document through the Google Drive folder so I can pull it up and share it with the rest of the class. So I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. So again, please use the chat and the Whova app if you have any ideas about how we should reorganize this data. Okay, let me just preview it for you all. Hopefully you've had some time to look at it yourself. The main thing that I want to point out with this is that we would need to take these column headers that have 11th graders, and that really is a group of data. The group of data refers to a grade level. So what I want to do is take that grade level and make that its own column as opposed to these 4 separate columns. So that would look something more like this, where now I have for Anacostia High School, it's not just one row, it's 4 different rows, with each one being a grade level. And so when I think about what the record is here, the record is a combination of the school and the grade level, and then I can see there's 200 students. And the reason we're doing this is because now it would be a little bit easier for me to go through and, I can, in Excel, for example, we could sort to just the 10th graders. If I put this in a pivot table, I could figure out the average at each school by grade level or by some other characteristic of the school, like who the principal is. So this is a better way to organize it. Let me pull back to the slides for a second and show you a quick aside. So a quick aside right here, I think, can we all see, if we can't see the presentation, please somebody speak up or put it in the chat. But what we just kind of discussed was the difference between wide data and long data. So wide data is how people often kind of structure their data for a person to look at. And long data is also called machine readable data. It's more for how a computer would want to analyze it. Wide data usually kind of goes, like we said, wide. It fills up the screen. It looks really good if you print it on a piece of paper. Long data does not look as good on a screen. It looks more confusing for a human, and it usually has lots and lots of rows. But it helps, you know, something like a Python or Excel or SQL, you know, manipulate that a lot faster. And so whenever you're trying to set up your data as part of like the raw ingredients of your analysis, you always want to prefer this long data format where it's only a few columns but many rows, as opposed to the wide data, which is a lot of columns but not very many rows. Okay, so we'll go ahead and look at the second example then. So the second example is going to be when we have multiple values in one column. Let me go back to that document. All right, so here's the example, the second example I want to go through. The mistake that we're trying to avoid is when we store too many values in one field or one column. And this spreadsheet is a list of athletic rosters for different sports teams at DCPS high schools. So like usual, we have a school ID, a school name. Some of the new things here is we have a roster name, and then we have the number of participants on that roster. Let me just pause real quick. I saw one question in the chat about how can you turn wide data into long data without doing it manually, from Stephanie. So as I mentioned, I don't want to go spend too much time on like the specific details of how we do that in different programs. I'll mention that it's actually very difficult to do that in Excel without doing it manually. If you want to learn a little bit about R or Python or some of those programming languages, there's actually a lot of tools to recast it with just kind of one simple command line. So if that's something you find yourself doing very often, I'd encourage you to kind of learn a little bit more about that. Some things you can try in Excel would be like text to columns, for example, but it's really kind of limited what you can do in Excel. Again, you know, use the language that I'm giving you to kind of Google that. So Google, how do I do wide data in whatever my program is? How do I do long data, whatever my program is? And you should get some good like Stack Overflow responses to look up. But this mistake number 2 we're looking at here for the roster data is about the mistake we're trying to avoid is putting too many data points in one column. And the one that kind of immediately stands out is this roster name, because it's so long and there's so many words in here, there's things I can separate out. So I'm trying to atomize this into all of its tiniest little smallest portions. So the second roster right here says winter 2013-14 varsity indoor track boy Anacostia High School. That's a lot of information that I want to pull out. So let me first unfilter this so I don't make a mistake in my data. One of the first thing I say I can pull out would be something called seasons. So I see here this one has spring and this one has winter, and sometimes Excel kind of, you saw it preview there, it wants to fill it out all for me. So winter, that's a season. Then the next thing I see is a school year. So this one says 2014. This one says 2013-14, and that might be something I have to figure out later on, you know, which way should I store this? Should I store it as 13-14 or just 14? Or, you know, maybe I need to change some of the data points in here to some more consistent framework in terms of how it looks. So those are the first 2 things I can see I can pull out would be season and school year. What are some other things that y'all see I can pull out? If you want to put it in the chat, just some other data points I can pull out of this roster name field. Yes, so that's for sport. So sport would be a good one. School would be a good one too. So I'll come over here and we'll scroll over. Girl, boy. Yeah, so thinking with sport, I mean, one thing I want to think about that is I could just say this is the second one would be varsity indoor track boys, right? But I could actually separate that out into even more things. So you mentioned that this could be gender. So I'll put gender right here and I'll call this boys. And this will just be varsity indoor track regular. And I could even get more specific, and I can put something in here which is like the level of it. Is it varsity or JV? So this one will be varsity, maybe it's freshman or JV. This one's just indoor track. And then over here, we're going to have school. And this might be repetitive since we already had school as one of the columns over in column A. So I'm gonna have to think about, do I need that? You know, if any of them are different, why is that? Maybe look into that and clean up that data. Right. So this is kind of how I want to separate it out. Now I have really 6 different data points off that one called roster name, and this will help me do a lot more information. Before I did this, if you had asked me, you know, how many kids played indoor basketball last year, I'd have a difficult time answering that question, because if I went up here and tried to like filter it, for example, to just basketball, I would get all kinds of things that include boys and girls in different school years, and that would be difficult. If you try to figure out the average number on a tennis team, same problems. When you organize it more like this, you're going to be able to kind of do that stuff easier. So as we show the completely fixed up, it would look more like this. And I immediately know this looks better because every one of these columns has basically one word in it, and that's almost it. And now if I want to figure out how many kids played basketball in 2015, we can do basketball, and I'll find 2015. And then you could even do boys or girls, right? And now I have all the basketball teams. I might even need to filter more to just like the varsity ones, for example, and sum that all up. So it becomes a lot easier and a lot more flexible. My manager could ask me any different question about this data, and I would be able to answer it within about 30 seconds. So that's how you want to organize it. Again, it'll take some time if you get bad data like this to go through and clean it all up. So another thing I want to talk about too is how you set this up in the first place, so you're not getting all this messy data from from the people at your school. This came in messy for me because when we originally gave rosters, everyone was free to kind of call their roster whatever they wanted. We gave some suggestions. Some people followed them, some people didn't. And that's why we have so much variety in terms of what the school names are. So let me do this quick aside on data validation. Switch my screen. Okay. So let's talk about data validation for a second. Here I have a school called H.D. Woodson High School, a school over in Ward 7. How many different ways could I potentially write this word? Well, there's a lot of ways you could write this word. Here's a number of the ways I've seen this word come through from different people in our school system. Right, so the second one there, they can put periods between the high school, between the H and the S. They can put senior high school, especially anything when your schools are named after people. We can have the full first name, we can abbreviate it. We can do all kinds of different things. And this gets very difficult for my data analysis because I know this all refers to just one entity, one school, but it looks like 12 different things in my data set. And so I want to avoid this problem ever occurring in the first place if I have an opportunity to create my own data. And this makes sense when I look at a school, but even something a little bit more familiar, like when that data set we're looking at gender for girls and boys, even with girls, you can get funny things back. So some different ways that girls can come through would be like this. They can put apostrophes, we can call it women's, people can misspell girls. You'll have some wild cards that want to, get creative and call themselves like the Lady Tigers or, the ferocious females or something like that. And so we want to avoid letting our users put data in like this. So pretty much every program you've ever seen, any kind of form, has an option for data validation. This is a screenshot from QuickBase. There's a similar thing in Google Forms. And basically it's a dropdown. You as the person that's building the data collection tool can force users to choose a particular thing. In this case, I'm forcing them to choose a school, so there's only one version of that spelling of H.D. Woodson High School they can pick. And we always ask, how do I do this? It's pretty easy. You can do it in Google Forms. Excel also has a version of data validation if you have to use Excel sheets where you can get drop downs and gives them error messages if they don't put the right thing in. It takes you some time to kind of type all this stuff up. I've got 120 schools that I have to kind of put in every time I set up a new data collection form, but it saves me so much work in terms of having to clean up the data and the second step of that process. So I'd really encourage you, whenever you're setting up a data collection platform, to think about what are the choices I want to force users into, and almost never, ever, ever let them put a text field in unless you are truly, imagine 500 different responses for that, and that's how you want your data to come back out looking out for you. Okay, any questions on those things, some of the things we've been going over? Let me just check the Q&A. Okay, looks like we're good. So let me go to the next example, or next mistake, I should say. So mistake number 3 here is where people tend to encode data through their formatting. This is things like coloring, or when you're kind of using the grid of an Excel sheet to kind of organize data and putting something in the top or the bottom or the left or the right. So good examples of how this works would be, let me see, there's a chat thing here. Okay. So examples of how often see this playing out would be people that highlight strange cases. Oh, I got to follow up with this student or this teacher, so I'm going to highlight it. They'll use like a red or green or yellow status field, but no text to tell me what that red, green, or yellow status field means. You can usually guess, but there's no text there. There'll be blank rows for white space, merged cells, things like that. So let's look at the example. Oh, and before well, we'll just go ahead with that. Okay, so here's an example of how that could look for you. So this is a spreadsheet I got from someone at our district that was referencing the computer information of some of our employees. And you can see this looks really, really useful for me as a human to look at this and kind of understand it. I could print it out on a piece of paper and it would look really nice and easy for me to follow up, but this is not a machine readable format. So some of the things that I want to avoid in this, the first is these highlighted cases. So I have these 2 employees here, Miguyet Rocco and Mitch Flavin, that are highlighted, and I don't know why they're highlighted. It probably meant something the person made the spreadsheet. It means nothing to me. I don't understand, like, did these people, did they quit? Are they new? I don't know what's going on. So I don't want to, if I was to set this up, I wouldn't want to do this. What I want to do is make a column that describes what's going on for this. And that column might be like missing email address, which seems to be the only thing I can find out with this. So missing email address, and I'll say that most of these people are no, and this one is yes, and then no, 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 right? Okay. And then I can kind of get rid of this highlighting. So we don't see that anymore. Now I'm encoding this data through an actual text, through a column and some text. So if I wanted to figure out, like, sort just the ones that have that highlighted situation, I have it encoded right here as an actual data column. This is also really important if you ever convert your data to a CSV or ever want to upload it to another system or download from another system. All of that formatting you have in terms of color coding disappears when you convert to CSV. So that information will be totally lost. Excuse me. Which is why I want to encode it right here. Some other things I want to avoid is these dual column headers. So I have this kind of merged cell right here called key information that spans 4 columns, and then I have a staff ID number, a staff name, an email address, and a division or team. I don't really need to know its key information as I'm analyzing my data. I kind of understand this associates with staff. If I was really unclear because I had so many columns, I could instead just call this staff ID and then staff name and staff email address. And basically what I'm doing is I'm putting some more verbose column headers. And by doing that, I can get rid of this key information because now it's encoded within the column header. And same thing with these other things over here. If it was unclear what this asset tag number referred to if it wasn't a computer, I could call it the computer asset tag. And now I can get rid of this column header right here. Again, that's useful because merged cells really cause a lot of problems when you're trying to sort or pivot your data. So we're looking a little bit better. And same thing down here with the central office employees. And this is kind of the last thing I see is that we have this white space in between school-based employees and central office employees. I've effectively grouped these 2 things. But anytime I'm grouping something, a grouping can always be a field. So if I'm grouping it by school or classroom or anything else, I can always make that a field. So instead of having these as 2 different tables, they're really the same information in both tables. So I can just combine them and I'll add a new column called like work location. And these guys will be school employees. And these folks down here will be central office. And now that I've encoded that visual categorization through a column name, I can get rid of this white space in between and the table name. And I can get rid of this table name over here as well. And now our data is starting to look more like an actual spreadsheet. Also this, I guess this columns too, where it's just like one big spreadsheet. You know, everything, this table is a whole observational unit of staff. And every record is every record is its own row. Every data point is its own column. There's one more thing I could do with this, thinking back to some of the earlier lessons we looked at 10 or 15 minutes ago, to make this an even better format of data. If you have an idea, put in the chat what else I should do to this to really make it look better. So what is the additional 1 or 2 things I can do to clean this up? Drop-downs, someone suggested drop-downs in the chat. That would be a good idea. I'm trying to think of where I would use drop-downs. I might use drop-downs for, you know, newsletter all staff to make sure I just type in yes or no instead of Y or N or true or false or something like that. Did you have a different idea of where I could put those? Team column, yeah, that's kind of the main thing I'm looking at right here. I really have 2 data points, or maybe you're referring drop-downs, but I really have 2 different things in this column. I have a staff division, and then I have a team. So my staff division here in this first row is YE, and the team is student attendance and support services. That's 2 data points, just like we were looking with the roster data. I want to separate that out into 2 different things. So I might actually add a new column here, and this one we'll just call division, and this one we'll call team, and so this one would be YE, and this one would be student services. And looks like not all of these things have teams, so CS core, maybe that's just a division, but most of them do. I forgot what this one was. So you'd want to separate this out like this. And as you mentioned, that yes, I'd want to have both of these 2 columns be drop downs if people were entering data for me, because I probably only have 5 or 10 divisions and maybe 20 or so teams, but it's definitely a small number relative to the size of the staff members that I have. Okay. So when this is all cleaned up, we would look more like this, kind of what we're just looking at, where I have you know, the name, the ID, the email address, email, location. I kind of move this one over, division, team, and everything else. And this is just a more complete data set that I can sort and filter and perform different manipulations on. Most notably here, again, I do not have any colors anywhere in my data set. Nothing is highlighted or color coded. I also have no white space. I have no merged cells. Those are kind of like the 3 things I'm trying to avoid with the visual stuff. Yeah, and again, someone said I could darken my lines in columns J and K back over here to make it look like the rest of the sheet. And so I could certainly do that for me to look at it as the data analyst. But in terms of how Excel is reading this data, it's not important at all. In fact, I could even, to kind of really reinforce the habit, I don't even need to have these borders. I don't need to have any formatting. I don't need to have anything being bolded. Just like straight up plain, well, this needs to be black, I guess, because it was white font. But other than that, you know, it can be just straight up plain text and your computer will read it just fine. So just always remember that any of that formatting you do is for you as a data analyst, or it's like a visualization tool for a manager or a school teacher or someone that you're sharing this data set with. So really try to get yourself away from using any color coding whatsoever. It will help make sure you avoid introducing new mistakes like that. So let me give you all a practice example to work on. So this right here, let me zoom in. This is like an operating plan that we had at our district in terms of like if these projects are on track. And so I want you to think about this, and if you have Excel, you can open it up yourself and start modifying it. I want you to try to change this to avoid all the mistakes we just discussed in terms of formatting. So getting rid of merged cells, getting rid of white space, getting rid of any colors, and making sure any information that's encoded through colors or placement on the page is actually recorded as its own data column. So let me give you about 3 or 4 minutes to work on that yourself. And then if you have solutions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can also submit that through the Google Drive folder if you want to share a spreadsheet that you've been working on. And if you do put something in the Google Drive folder, please note it in the chat so I know to look there for your spreadsheet. Okay, so think about this example on your own and just try to avoid these mistakes that we've been discussing so far in terms of how this stuff is organized. Okay, I'm going to come back together to kind of keep us on track. I haven't seen a whole lot of responses in the chat yet, but I'll just kind of go over some of the things that we should have changed with this, and hopefully you caught a few of these. So the first one I noticed is that I have this white space in here in between my different groups. It looks like the white space is helping me visually sort out the difference between my different teams. So I have a SAS team and like a YE team, and then other teams here that must be grouped for some reason. So I can take these columns that were called 9 and 21 that have no information in them, and I will delete them. To show you why I'm deleting them is if I were to come in here in Excel and try to filter this and put these in order, well, first give me an error because the merged cells, but it would also only filter the ones down here to call it line 8. Like Excel would start to think that these aren't really in the same grouping of data. So that's why I want to delete this white space. Okay. The second thing then is we just kind of saw with the merged cells. So I have this merged cell right here for SASS, and it seems to apply to all 5 of these projects seem to be in the SAAS team. So where I'm doing that, I want to unmerge this. And then we'll just make sure that that textual information of SAAS is applied to all of the rows. And I would do the same thing over here for project owners. And down here, there's 2 more that have merged cells that we will undo. Right? And making sure that information goes down to the other columns when I finish with that. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better. I probably don't need this title header up here. It's not doing a whole lot of harm as it is right now. If I converted this to a CSV, I'd want to delete it, but for just an Excel spreadsheet, it's probably okay. But I will delete it anyway to kind of make it look as best as possible. And then the last thing I need to handle are these 2 color-coded things right here. So first of all, I have something called status. Again, if I were to ever convert this to a CSV or share it in some way, this information would accidentally get deleted. It's also kind of unclear to me as someone who's unfamiliar with this spreadsheet what this stuff means. Presumably this means something like this is on track and this is not started and this is completed, but these could also be grades, right? Like this could be like, okay job, like a bad job, we didn't really do very well on that one, or this one was a great job. So it's not really, I don't really understand what that is. Whatever it is, I want to encode it though as actual text to go along with the color coding that I have right here. And then the final thing is these orange ones that are highlighted. There's nothing in the spreadsheet to tell me why these are highlighted. Maybe it's because they were in July and now the month is July, I don't really know. But I would want to add a new column right here to reference whatever this orange thing is. I'll just call it like special cases because I don't really know what they are. And most of these would not be a special case and this one would. And I've been using yes or no, but you could also do this in different ways. Like this could be something like, the special case could be here, could be like involve students. And this one might also involve students. And these other ones could just be blank if they don't involve students or they don't have any special case that goes along with them. But just, we want to think about whatever that orange thing is. Now someone put in the chat, well, we got rid of the colors, but couldn't we just kind of keep them and make it easier for humans to read? And so you certainly can do this. So like how I have it set up right now is kind of a nice compromise between making it very machine readable, but also a little human readable. And I can keep this as orange as long as I always remember to type in over here in my special case column, what this orange color means. And as long as I always remember to type in my status column, what this text right here means. But what I've noticed is that as we kind of move through things throughout the day and you get busy and you forget, this color coding is just so attractive to like human eyes that you oftentimes forget to fully go through and do all the data implementation you need on it. So that's why I'm saying if this is kind of a new skill for you to really just to help enforce good habits, get rid of the color coding, but it's certainly possible to keep it in there as long as you're basically dual encoding it once through text and also once through color. That's certainly an option. Okay. Yep, so we looked at that. So this is kind of like, again, like the final version of what this might look like. So we've got about 12 minutes left. Let me go through our last example. This is probably gonna be the more advanced example for those of you that have stayed with us this long and maybe been a little bit bored so far. And what I want to emphasize here is the idea that every table in a data set needs to be its own observational unit. So what we're looking at right now is some information about books that have been returned or outstanding textbooks for my English class. So you can see I have in this spreadsheet a title, Death and the Maiden, an author for that book, a homeroom for my students, Columbia, Duke, or Swarthmore, how many books were assigned to that homeroom, how many were returned, and then which students still have outstanding books. And the challenge with this is that this really needs to be separate tables that are kind of all smushed together. And so how I'd actually want to separate this out is a little bit right here. I'm going to color code it for y'all. So in green, I have some information about books. So I have one book called Death and the Maiden by Errol Dorfman. I have another book called Glassbow's Trifles. I have some information about my homerooms, like Columbia, how many books they got, how many are outstanding. And then I have some information about the kids that have outstanding books. And these three different colors should actually be three different tables. The good key for me, oh, I'm sorry. I need to share, I'm sorry, hang on 1 second. Apologies if the technical issues. Okay, I think we're now seeing the new screen. Perfect, thank you, Susan. Okay, so again, this is some data about books. And in green, I have the book information. In white, I have information about how many books were assigned to that homeroom. And then in orange, I have information about which students still need to turn their books in for this school year. The reason I know that this needs to be three different tables is because of kind of two dead giveaways. The first is over here by the books, I'm repeating information. So I've Death and the Maiden by Errol Dorfman repeated 3 different times. And one thing we always want to avoid is any place where you need to enter information more than once. So if, for example, this Death and the Maiden book had a subtitle and I wanted to put that in here, Death and the Maiden, I don't know if it's Death by Chocolate or something, right? As I have it set up right now, I'm gonna have to enter that 3 different times, and that's a clue that this needs to be its own table. Conversely, over here with the orange, I actually have a lot of different data scrunched up into this one cell. And that tells me this section needs to be separated out. I probably need a different row for every one of Sam, Kate, Nina, and Victoria. Okay, so let's kind of look in more detail what books might look like. With books, I might have a table right here where every book is its own record. So the first book is The Stranger by Albert Camus, and I have an ISBN number for that and an Amazon link. And so any information about the book will go on this table. I might have a price, I might have the number of pages, I might have like a, it's 4 out of 5 stars. Any book information goes in this table. Each book is only showing once. And so all the book information stays right here. Same with students. Okay, we've probably all seen lists of our students that come out of our SIS. I have information for my student. I have the local ID or USI number, their name, their grade, their ISP status, their home phone, their homeroom. Any information about my student goes here. If I wanted to add, GPA or attendance or anything else, I would put it all in my student tab because these are all information points about the students. And then the last thing would be a table called book assignments. And this is really a way to connect the books and the students. And we have, so every book, and this is not going to look friendly to us, but it actually helps the computer a lot. I have a student ID right here, like a USI number. We'll just call it USI since I think student ID is a DCPS thing, so USI. I have an ISBN number for that book. So this student plus this book, and any information about that student plus that book. There's a date it was issued to the student, a date it was returned. I might have information like the condition the book came back in. It might be good or fair, different things like that. Any information about that book assignment will be listed in its own table. Another thing that we kind of discussed back when we were talking about principles of data analysis is that every single row or record should have a unique key that references that element. So in my books right here, my unique key is an ISBN number. And that's why we have ISBN numbers and why we have social security numbers and USI numbers. Is so that way this number only refers to one book. And I can kind of easily reference it in a VLOOKUP or a merged table or something like that. In students, we oftentimes use local ID numbers or USI numbers. And then for book assignments, there's no kind of natural number I can think of that makes sense. So I just kind of, put numbers in here. And I must have sorted this before I began a session, but normally I would just probably just come here and start just typing them in order. And that would be just fine for our unique ID number. We'd have a book assignment number like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't need to be anything special unique to the data. When I started out, I used to try to do stuff like, oh, maybe it needs to be USI-ISBN. It really doesn't matter what your key is. So another way of thinking about these 3 different tables of books, students, and book assignments is through a schema. A schema is a visual representation of how several different tables relate to each other. So here we can see I have the tables of books and students, books that has books information, students that has students information, and they connect to each other through a book assignment table that basically takes one book plus one student, matches them up, and there's some additional information about that book plus student matchup that we have, like the date it was issued or the date it was returned. So as you start getting to kind of more complex things about like developing databases, you'll need to think a lot more carefully about how you do this. Some of you might already be doing this in terms of you storing files on your computer. Like you'll probably have a file that has all of your students, you might have a file of staff, you might have a file of test results, and you kind of VLOOKUP and stuff to combine those things. And the point I'm trying to make is you should be thoughtful about how you structure those different tables or different tabs in Excel spreadsheets so they can connect better. And just because this looks really ugly to us in terms of, you know, the books and the students and the book assignments, we can make it look a little bit nicer in terms of a dashboard. So this is a dashboard I could create with this. And here we can see, again, I still have it color coded in terms of how this stuff comes through. So this orange is information about the student. The green is information about the book. And the gray is information about the book assignment. And so this is something I could print out and I could give to a teacher. I could come up here and filter this, for example, to the ones that don't have not been returned yet, just the blank ones, and give this to my teacher. I could also sort to just like the Columbia books. And I could give this to my Columbia homeroom teacher and say, okay, you know, Miss Jackson, here are the students with books that are outstanding. And she could use this more easily to go through. She might organize her students. And so now she could call Michelle and say, hey, Michelle, Metamorphosis is still outstanding. Or, hey, Lee, you have 2 books outstanding, Gaspels, Trifles, and Metamorphosis. And she has a home phone number here to call. So when I build my dashboard, I'm thinking more about how do I combine these 3 different tables together? And behind the scenes, what's going on, if I expand my columns and hide these, you can see I have these unique keys that I'm using to connect this. So the student information right here is connecting through the student ID. The book is connecting through the ISBN number, and the gray information about book assignments are collecting right here through the key. Okay. It looks like we're not gonna have time to go through the example of this or the final assignment, which is okay. I'll just, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Also go ahead and fill out this feedback survey. Let me do a quick summary of what we learned today to go back to our slides. Okay, so again, to kind of summarize some of the stuff that I talked about that you should start doing your data analysis. Always prefer long data to wide data, organizing it so that we don't have multiple data points as different fields. You want to atomize your variables, which means splitting them up into different pieces. We looked at that with the roster data where we had, you know, boys varsity, indoor track, and we split those into their separate columns. We don't use any formatting to record data, things like colors or spacing on a table. And finally, what we just discussed 2 minutes ago is we're going to prefer many small tables to a single big one. And we want to make sure that each data is its own observational unit on that. You know, so unfortunately with this kind of being a virtual session, it's a little hard to do some of the audience feedback I like to do. But if you guys have questions about this, feel free to reach out to me directly. That's my email address up there. If you want to kind of discuss particularly any data problem you're having at your school or in your organization, happy to be a thought partner on that. And like I said, go ahead and complete that survey. The link to that is in the chat. One of the session organizers just posted that there. Okay. So thank you all for coming. I hope this was useful. Gave you a couple of things to go think about and research more on your own. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions for myself.